This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm outside the Friends Meeting House in Ward Street, Guildford, and I'm about to go in and interview John Morris, who's standing for the Peace Party in the general election in December. John, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed this morning.
It's a pleasure.
And I ought to say, first of all, that thank you as well for allowing us to use your Friends Meeting Room here in Ward Street in Guildford.
Yeah.
A very historic building, and it's a lovely environment to have this meeting with you.
Yeah.
Now, you represent the Peace Party. You're a candidate for the Peace Party.
Correct.
Tell me something about the party and who funds it.
Right. Well, the party was set up by 3 or 4 of us in 1997, or just before that general election, because we were dissatisfied with all the other parties with their stance on peace and war. They all wanted to have some kind of military in order to so-called protect us. Anyway, so we set up the party then, although there have been parties before that had a similar philosophy to the Peace Party. So this time we're contesting 2 seats, the neighbouring one in Horsham and this one in Guildford. And we have a small number of supporters around the country, and they make small contributions into the financial pot. I make a fairly substantial donation as well. It's one of my interests. As you can tell, it's been an interest of mine for many, many years.
So is the deposit the main item of spending that you have to fund?
Yes, it's the main one, but of course if we were to have sufficient literature to distribute all around the constituency, then that will be a major item of expenditure. But
so you can't run to that?
We can't run to that,
no.
So there will be some.
What is the deposit? How much is the deposit?
It's £500, and that's returnable if the candidates score 5% of the vote cast or more.
Or more. Okay, well thank you for that. And now I'd like to discuss the philosophy of pacifism itself, because that is behind the whole enterprise, I imagine.
Absolutely right, yes.
So can you tell me, are you an absolute pacifist?
I am an absolute pacifist, yes. I wouldn't be doing this if I were not, because even the Green Party leader once told me years ago that she was almost a pacifist, which doesn't make any sense to me. You either are a pacifist or not.
Okay.
And so that's where I come from. I don't want to kill anybody. I don't want anybody to kill anybody else for me, which means I don't hold with the military, the army. I realise there are problems sometimes with crazy people who pick up a gun or another weapon, but basically that is wrong.
Right, so what about self-defence?
So self-defence might come into it, but the ultimate of being a pacifist, which is where I'm coming from, is that if I can't defend myself using my own strength, physical strength, then I'm prepared to take the ultimate, and that's to be killed, even in the defence of somebody else, such a relative. But of course we're not talking about person-to-person things with pacifism. We're talking about, or I'm talking about, standing for Parliament as somebody who's against war, the massive military development of pacifism.
Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just examine how you would apply this philosophy to different areas of government. And let's start with the most obvious, defence.
Yeah.
So if your party was in power,
right,
what changes would we see in terms of defence?
Well, over a period of time, there would be the closing down of the military. The military, of course, are used for purposes other than fighting other people, and so there would have to be some form of another type of emergency service that would go out and help people when their homes are flooded, when there are fires, in terms of diseases in other countries, to go and help the people there. So there would have to be something in place of what the military do besides killing people. So all that would gradually be wound down, and the weapons disposed of. We would not have any weapons at all, so the nuclear defence, all that would go. And all our alliances, of course, with other countries through NATO or any other military organisation, we would have to say goodbye to those countries, because like countries like Ireland and Costa Rica, we wouldn't be part of any military organisation at all.
Okay, and what you would just trust all other countries not to abuse that stance?
Yes, it's working with Costa Rica. Costa Rica hasn't had an army for maybe 50 years or so, and nobody is threatening Costa Rica. It's a slightly different size, of course, from Britain, but that's a good model for how we would trust our relationships within the world.
So how do you think Mr. Putin in Russia would react if, for instance, Ukraine followed your philosophy?
I would hope that there were lots of other things in place that would replace the military in terms of developing relations with other countries. We don't have to develop them, we've got lots of them in place now. The European Union, of course, is one of the means of keeping the peace in Europe, and it's kept it for 70 years, thank goodness. I was working out last night that my children and grandchildren haven't lived in a time of war. My parents lived through 2 world wars and I lived through 1. So the European Union is a good example of how we develop relations with other countries.
Right, now you mentioned the Second World War there. If Hitler hadn't have been opposed militarily, he would have succeeded, wouldn't he?
He may well have done, but that's history now, Martin. We don't. We learn from history not to do what we did with that particular dictator. He arose, of course, in Germany.
But what did we learn from that then? What did we learn from the Nazi period?
Well, from the lead up to the Nazi period, we learned that we don't impose all kinds of restrictions on the loser in a war. So the First World War really led to the Second because of the Treaty of Versailles being very hard on the German nation, and the German nation, as a result, found its way forward through a dictator, Hitler.
So you think the cause of the Second World War was down to the Versailles Treaty, basically?
That was a major part of it, in my view, yes. It may not be all the historians.
Dictators do emerge in different countries, don't they? I mean, there's still some around today.
Yes, yes.
So how would you deal with those people if they're prepared to use force?
You have to use all the methods of what we call non-violence, and part of it is, most of it, all of it, is talking with other nations, with other peoples, so that any conflict, and by conflict I don't mean war or fighting, we get conflict in situations all through the world every day, from the person up to the nation.
Now let's take it down to a lower level then, law and order.
Right.
Would you still imprison people?
Yes, it's a pity we have to lock people up for what they do, what society considers they do wrong. There's a lot of work to be done in society to deal with, it's that word conflict again, that conflicts occur, that there's all kinds of reasons why why people end up in prison rather than learning to be good members of society.
So do you think bad behaviour, or criminal behaviour even, is all down to environment, that there aren't bad people, that their circumstances make them bad?
Yes, that's part of my Quaker philosophy, that all people are good, basically good, and that's what we need to work on through the education system, through the support for families, support for housing. It all comes down to the whole environment in which we live.
Okay, but if you accept imprisonment at all, how would you get people into prison if you weren't prepared to use physical force if they resisted?
Yeah, well, there's going to be some physical force needed in the interim. We've got a long way to go from where we are in society today to the kind of non-violent society that I'm envisaging.
Okay, so your government, if we imagine it, it wouldn't close all the prisons immediately.
You can't do that, no. You can't move suddenly from one situation.
And prison officers and the police would still be able to use physical force where necessary.
Well, they unfortunately have to, yes. But
and what about when a policeman encounters a terrorist? We have seen those instances, haven't we?
Yes, yes.
What would your rules be of engagement in those in that circumstance?
Yeah, well, again, it's moving from where we are today with threats of terrorism to a society where we have dealt with those problems that are causing the terrorists to be there and to be wanting to attack us.
I understand, John, but you know, if you or I were a policeman in a street and it was our job to protect people, and all of a sudden a terrorist appears.
Yes, yes.
I can't say, well, you know, let's take this back to the causes in that instant. Can we?
No, you can't in that instance. Obviously not. No, you have to deal with the situation as it is.
And would that include shooting someone?
I suppose the police are armed today, so when necessary.
Well, they're not all armed, but some of them are.
Some
yes.
of them,
yes.
Some of them can be armed, and at the stage that, let's say, I were in Parliament, I couldn't do much to change the current situation, and that having to shoot people might be part of the way of dealing with a difficult situation.
Okay, so let's move on to Brexit now. Now, you've already said that you're pro-EU in this interview.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's your stance on Brexit?
So my stance has always been that because it's a peace organisation, the European Union, that we must be in it. And I've always worked for staying in the European Union. And full stop.
Now, okay, so you say it's I think you described it as a peace organisation, did you?
Yes, that's how it.
I mean, certainly it was formed in the wake of the Second World War. Yeah. And importantly involved France and Germany, which had fought a lot in history. Yeah. But there is talk about a European army, isn't there? Unfortunately,
yes. And had I been elected to the European Parliament when we did stand as a peace party for that, I would have totally opposed the idea of a European army.
But would you still think it's a peace organisation?
So it is a peace organisation, yes.
Because of its roots, you mean?
Because of its roots, and because of the fact that we all meet together, all 27, 28 countries meet together and deal with the problems that are occurring in all of our nations.
Okay, so now it's connected with Brexit, really. I take it you're in favour of free movement if you're in favour of the EU?
Yes, absolutely.
Actually, what I didn't ask was, so what would you do about Brexit? We've had a referendum where by 4% we said we wanted to leave. Yeah. Would you revoke that?
If there were some way of revoking the application for Article 50, I would do that and support that.
Right, and what would you say to the 17.4 million people that voted for it?
I'm one of the other people who didn't vote for it. Sorry, that's what I'm supporting.
Okay.
Of,
How's that democratic then?
well, the democracy centres around the population of the country, so there were not just the people who voted Remain, there are all the rest of the 66. There are 66 million of us in Britain. 17.4 is not a large percentage, so I would point out that...
Well, it wasn't 17.4%, it was 17.4
million. Yes, thank you for the correction. Yes, so the 17.4 million is a fraction of the 66 million of us in the UK, and I don't see it democratic that they should wag the 66 million of us dog.
But that's how we normally conduct elections here, isn't it? We don't presume anything about the people that don't vote.
No.
Either way.
Unfortunately, we don't, but we should be thinking of those people, and because referenda have never been part of the British Constitution, we shouldn't have been...
So you don't agree with referenda?
I don't agree with referenda, no.
So John, we have a housing shortage here in Guildford and indeed across the country. What would be your policy on housing?
The policy on housing must be to build more and more homes, where 300,000 homes short across the whole country at the moment, and that figure needs to be repeated year after year. I think the figure for Guildford is somewhere around 650 per year for the foreseeable future. So we've got to crack on, and I would do all I can to encourage the building of more and more homes across the country in Guildford.
Okay, so obviously the increase in population is what's driving this.
Yes.
And most of the population increase is caused by immigration in this country.
It's caused not only by immigration, but also by the natural growth of the population in the country.
Well, the birth rate in the UK is I'm not sure if it's negative, but it's very low.
It's low, but
yes.
And there is, of course, a hangover from the last 20 or so years when we've had very little in the way of new homes built, so we've just got a tremendous backlog of homes.
Okay, but do you see there being no limit to the population that this country can cope with?
Basically, yes. I've got to say yes. I can't see peace being spread throughout the world without people having all the conditions that they need to live properly. Not only a home to live in, but food, all the things that we have in this country, but many other countries don't have. There is a lot of work to be done by this country on its own, but particularly by the United Nations and the European
But you
Union.
don't see a problem with the world's population and the resources of the planet?
Of course, there is a problem. There could be a problem, but it needs to be managed a great deal better than it is being managed at the moment. And I would do my little bit to help.
Okay, but I mean, does that mean that you wouldn't impose any immigration restrictions?
I can't, no. I can't see that being part of being a peace person who wants to be following all the basic real human values that we all have, we all share, starting with kindness, compassion. How can you be compassionate and kind if you exclude people from coming to live in a nice place? I can't see it. I know this is going to cause difficulties, but we have the will, we should have the will to solve the problems over a period of time. It's not going to happen tomorrow.
Will it continue to be a nice place if we continue to develop it?
I believe it can be, yes. And we should also continue to work with those other countries from where people are coming from to try to live here. We've let them down in their home countries, so we should be doing a lot more than we have
How have
ever
we let
done
them
in the
down
past.
there?
I beg your pardon?
How have we let them down in their home countries?
We've let them down by not helping them to reach a standard of living that is comparable with ours. We've set the world, we've got worlds with borders, boundaries.
Right, so how would you do that?
We
How
have-
would you help them in their own countries?
Right, we've got to work through the United Nations. We can't do it on our own. We need to bring all countries together, and they are beginning to work together. They have been since the Second World War. They're working together. It just needs to be stepped up so that we can say to people in Vietnam that we're not just going to buy your cheap shoes to help you survive better. We've got to do a lot more with those countries to help them to live up to the kind of standard and values that we have.
And how do you do that without interfering with their own internal politics?
We've got to talk to them. It's discussion, negotiation.
Now, linked to the world's population is climate change. You accept that there's a link between the world's population and the environmental challenges that poses?
Yes.
And that is part of the climate emergency issue?
Yes, and what has been happening, of course, is that various parts of the world, North America, Europe in particular, have been burning a lot of the fossil fuels, and so creating a lot of carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere.
And so what would your policies be to help in this area?
Right, so we have to reduce and eliminate within Britain, which is where we've got our main power, we've got to reduce our carbon dioxide and methane emissions down to nothing as swiftly as we can. I think Extinction Rebellion talk about 2025, which is very ambitious, but that's the kind of aim we've got to go for. So the building we're in is heated by gas, and that's creating carbon dioxide.
So what would you actually do?
So we've got to switch over to electricity generated.
So you'd create laws to do this?
Eventually, yes.
Okay.
We've got to do the building of the solar photovoltaics farms, and we've got to build the wind farms, continue building the wind farms as well, so that all the electricity that's being generated.
So if we're building housing and we're also creating these solar farms,
Yep.
aren't we going to run out of space for food production?
No.
No.
No. The amount of land that's, some people talk about being concreted over, the amount of land of this country that's concreted over is about 18%. We have, and that's where the 66 million, most of the 66 million people are. So we have plenty of space. It's a question of using it.
But isn't the remainder, well, some of it's pretty much uninhabitable if you look at some areas of the country.
True.
A large percentage of the other parts are used for food production, aren't they?
They are, yes. Yes.
So where is that food going to be produced?
It can be produced in the amount of land. We don't produce all the food we eat anyway in this country.
No.
I think it's about half of what
Already
we
we don't
consume.
produce all
No,
the food. But
no.
so isn't that in itself a risk? Because we're relying on other economies and agriculture in the world to produce that food for us.
Yeah, it's why we've got to be peaceful with every country in the world, because we all need each other. We all need to support each other in our lives.
Okay. Now, finally, you don't really expect to win in December, do you, John?
I haven't yet, no.
So why are you standing?
So I stand because I believe passionately in peace, which means not only not engaging in war, but creating pillars which support a peaceful society. So that's education, it's all good housing that we've talked about, it's good transport, it's everything that makes up society, and that is part of being peaceful. And at the moment we do lack the peacefulness in so many areas of our lives.
Okay, John Morris, thank you very much.
Thank you.